Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy's Dave.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted. Tonight we're revealing the secret about D&D combat that goes beyond monster stats and terrain.
Ever build the perfect encounter only to watch half the table zone out? We've been there. Fun combat isn't just the DM's job, it's a team effort.
Absolutely. Players can turn a boring slugfest into an epic scene by describing their attacks, setting personal stakes, and even collaborating with the DM. We're going to show you how to make every fight matter, no matter which side of the screen you're on. So first in Aether Skies, we'll show you how both the DMs and players can use shifting objectives and environmental hazards to turn a boarding action into a nail-biting heist.
Then we'll drop into Under the Dome, where survival stakes force characters and players to make tough calls that heighten the drama.
And finally, it's off to Zoo Mafia in a barroom brawl between raccoon bruisers and parrot enforcers. Clever player choices and cinematic descriptions keep everyone on the edge of their seats.
What's the most memorable combat encounter you've been part of? What did you, as a DM or player, do to make it more memorable? Share your stories in the chat below. Hey, a quick reminder, we're going to break this down into 3 segments as we've been doing. Our Aether Skies, Under the Dome, and then we have Zoo Mafia, followed by a Q&A. So if you have questions, just drop them in the chat, put question in front of them, we'll jump to them at the end. We're not ignoring you, I promise. We're just saving the best for last, and that is when we interact with you guys. So with that, let's jump into it.
All right, so with Aether Skies, combat with consequences, turning Arcana Punk battles into story-driven set pieces. Aether Skies is a steampunk fantasy world of flying cities, arcane-powered airships, and the looming threat of eldritch horrors. In this setting, every clash could be over territory, secrets, or just survival. And combat is much more about drama as it is damage. Links to our first ever Aether Skies and 5e D&D game are going to be down in the description below.
All right. In Aether Skies, combat isn't just a mechanical puzzle, it's a crucible for character development. Airship battles become moral dilemmas. Ether-fueled powers come at the cost of sanity. Characters like the Cursed Ethermancer or the Jaded Sky Corsair must weigh every action, not just in terms of damage output, but what it reveals about who they are and what they're willing to sacrifice. This segment will show how to bring these stakes into every round of initiative, whether it's high-speed boarding actions or desperate defense from other parasites mid-flight.
So let's dive into player-driven objectives and reactions to the environment. Give players a choice of what objectives to pursue mid-combat. Save the civilians, disable the crashing strut, or stop the enemy captain. Let them propose risky maneuvers, swinging from damaged ether lines, flooding the lower decks with fog, or igniting an ether tank as a last resort. Reward bold choices with cinematic outcomes.
So I would say on the other side of that is, not just the DM allowing those things to happen, but for the players to think about doing more than just, I'm going to roll another d20. I'm going to swing my sword. I'm going to cast magic missile. What are more interesting choices you can make as the player, in order to make these things happen, right? If you're in a ballroom, is there a chandelier? Can you cut the chandelier and maybe drop it on enemies? If your DM is willing to let you do fun things like that, you should absolutely attempt it. And it also just makes the combat more interesting.
That's the crux of it. And it really does come down to the DM being able to step outside the comfort zone of, rules as written and to do different things. And I don't need to go into detail, but I played a game once, and it was Adventure League, and I tried to do something fun, and of course it's standard play, so they're not going to allow you to do any of the fun things. But it was a learning point for me as a DM of like, oh well, how would I treat that in my game? So I've tried to be always open when a player comes to me with, hey, can I do this or can I do that? I'm like, all right, let's see where this goes. And it makes for far more compelling games, and it makes for much more interesting and memorable stories because a player said, I want to do this. So you know, you always want to look at those, yes ands and yes buts, and not just be like, oh no, no, that can't happen because it's not in the rules.
Yeah, very oftentimes, in our streamed games, Bobby will start his turn by going, "I want to try something weird," and I'm like, "You absolutely. Let's see what do you got for me." Now, do I go along with it every single time? No, but do I go along with it more than half? Probably, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I might require more die rolls or further explanation, or like you said, yes, but or yes, and right to go along
Mhm.
with it. But having your players be more engaged in the game that's going on, and you know willing to take chances and risks that maybe aren't necessarily on their character sheet, to me just adds to the whole experience. And in a setting like Aether Skies, when you're doing ship to ship combats, and you have flying cities, you've got corrupted eldritch horrors, and a magic system that is a little bit different than your standard D&D, where the magic itself can be a little hostile. It just opens up for more options for you can use as from the DM's perspective, from your toolbox, but also I would say even more importantly from the players, right? For them to offer up suggestions and ideas. Can I do this? Can I do that? And I'm here for it. And whenever I can say yes to something like that, that's going to make things more interesting. Maybe it isn't the best choice, but it can make things more fun, right? Remember, it's not just the DM's job to make a combat engaging and fun, but the players can also actively participate and add to that fun as well.
Now, the DM is only one player at the table. They might be guiding the story and, creating the world around you, but it is your job as the player to interact with it. It's your job to, add to what is going on. So when you're looking at, these environment situations, like ask questions. And again, I do preface it by you have to have a DM who is willing to do this. And if your DM is not, send him this video and say like, okay, you're going to get a lot out of it because everybody is going to be more engaged. And you know, we've said it many times. Like, it's not a competition between player and DM. Like, the DM has got all the cards. If he wants to kill you, there's nothing stopping him from killing you. It's there to create, a fun collaborative story, or at least that's the way we tend to approach this game, or any RPG for that matter. So do the risky things, have fun, and let those moments guide your story.
Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but in Other Skies, madness is a choice and a weapon. When Ether offers power at a cost, let the players decide. Burn sanity to overcharge a spell or stay safe and risk defeat. Empower them to choose their corruption. Will they tap into forbidden knowledge for tactical advantage or protect their minds at a cost of their mission? So,
So this is one of those things that whether you're talking about you know playing with specific rules of madness or sanity, and crossing those boundaries outside of Ether Skies, anyone can make the choice of, well, this might not be good for my character, but I think this is going to be fun, or this is going to be memorable. In your Ether Skies game, you're like, oh, I went to go pick up, the Ether Parasite or whatever it was called, and you're like, oh, you're gonna pick up a live one or a dead one, and I'm like, I know there's consequences for this, but yeah, both. And if you've watched the game, you see exactly where that wound up leading to. But by taking the risk, it made for a very, very cool moment. And sure, my specific character, like, traumatized by the moment, but mechanically, my character's not truly suffering by, by what happened. but it became a really cool story moment that like I was excited to talk about with my fellow gamers that are not not in the game, because it's like, hey, this thing cool happened, even though it was bad. This happened.
Yeah, so in that very same game, right? Like, one of the players asked me, hey, like they asked me if they could do something in the upcoming session that normally isn't really possible, but there's mitigating circumstances that I've said that maybe go, you know what, maybe it is possible. And even though it bends the rules, I have to ask myself, well, will it be more fun for this player to be able to do the thing they requested? And if the answer is yes to me, it's like, okay, let's do that. That's going to make for a more interesting combat, because that's, we have a combat, situation that's coming up. It's the kind of the finale for the session or for the season. And but with a caveat of going like, I will absolutely probably let you do that, but there may be some consequences for it. And they're like, perfect. I would expect no less, right? So you need that give and take when it comes to the GM and the players to make more memorable moments at the table. It's not, like Ted had mentioned, it's not about winning or losing from either side. It's about like, what kind of story can we tell together, and what kind of things can we do that are going to make this a lot more fun, right? And that's always what I'm thinking about, and what I'm trying to figure out is like, how can we further the story with this, and how can I keep my players more engaged?
Absolutely. But it's not always about madness or objectives. Sometimes it's making secrets part of the strategy. Encourage your players to turn character backstory into tactical leverage. Will the bard reveal the true origins to intimidate an enemy from the plane of air? Does the spy athlete use a banned ether ability in full view of the crowd to save a teammate? Let the players decide when to burn a secret and make it matter.
Yeah, so this is perfect, and this kind of like dovetails into what we're just talking about. About trying to do a thing and accepting the consequences for it. Again, I mentioned Bobby earlier, but Bobby's really good for this kind of stuff as well. Um, Also, I feel like I'm kind of a player that would do this stuff too, where it's like, oh, can I do the crazy thing? And if there's a consequences, I'm generally down to accept those consequences. I mean, Ted mentioned the Aether Skies game where he did just that, right? He knew that going in, like, oh, this part of the encounter is possibly going to make things more challenging, right? Because he said, "Can I do a thing?" Then I asked the leading question, and then like that's how he knew, right? That like, oh, what I say next
Matters.
matters. It's going to have a consequence, right? And that's kind of important too, as the GM, right? The DM is to like, you know, not just to say yes or no, but also be like, oh, well, sometimes just answering their question with a question kind of lets them know, oh, we're engaging in a thing here. We're engaging in a dialogue. This is going to mean something that matters. So, how do I want to proceed as the player? And like, do the risky thing, reveal the secret at an inopportune moment, right? If it's going to add to the fun at the table and the enjoyment for everyone in the game, right? And will it lead to more character development? And also, doing this kind of stuff, right, it allows for more role playing to happen during a combat encounter. So it's not just, oh, I roll a d20, I swing my sword, I cast a spell, make a saving throw, right? Like that gets a little old and stale after a while. But if you can incorporate things and have actual role playing happening while it's going on, or I love anytime you can incorporate different kinds of skill challenges into the middle of the combat as well, or have multiple objectives going on for the players to be engaged, and it's not just kill the monster, move on.
Now, Dave and I have very different philosophies when it comes to character creation or background creation for characters. I get all in on my character, and I like to make very rich and detailed backstories so that I have an idea of who I'm playing and how they're going to fit into the story that's being told. Whereas Dave likes to develop the character as he goes, and occasionally will work into what is going on of like, oh well, this is how this is all connected, and this is how I feel inspired by the other characters that I'm that he's playing alongside. So when it comes to revealing secrets, you don't just go up to the the person you meet for the first time. You're like, I'm going to drop my entire backstory on you. Like that's not really accepted in any kind of society. I'm certain that you've met people who are oversharers and that kind of stuff. So giving out little tidbits of your character and your backstory and letting it slowly come out when it is really affected by what's going on, ties your character to the story, to the other characters in a profound way. And if you've got the ability to kind of collaborate with your DM of like, hey, here's a cool thing that I want to, put out there. Can you work this in? Those are great ways to tie all those pieces together. Um, and we've talked numerous characters, through our thousands of videos about how this character is connected here and how this decision changed this thing over here. It makes your character more connected, and you as a player become more immersed in the game because you're looking for those moments of when like your story gets that aha moment. And if you do it right, everybody at the table is going to be like, well, that was really cool. And then again, you have those things that you get to kind of share and talk about.
And combat is the perfect time for the heat of the moment for those things to kind of come out, right? Because maybe not everyone's thinking at their best, right? Because of the high adrenaline situation and the turmoil that's going on. So it kind of makes sense too that some stuff might get revealed in the middle of a high stakes situation. you know Suppose somebody shows up from your backstory, right, that you really haven't talked about yet, but now all of a sudden it's playing out real time during initiative, right? I think that just adds another dynamic to what's going on. And depending on what your relationship is with your GM and your gaming style, like, you know you could even, as long as your GM's okay with it, maybe you need to pass them a note or something, or sidebar with them, but like be like, hey, can I be connected to this one particular villain or NPC that we're encountering now? Even though maybe it wasn't a thing before. Because like the way Ted had said, like I like to let my character's backstory kind of develop as I play, as I kind of get to learn the character a bit more. And like this would be a perfect time to do something like that. Now I know not every GM is going to be cool with it, but the ones that we generally play with are pretty open to player agency and letting us get a little weird with things at times, especially if it's in service of the story and heightening the drama that's going on at the table.
If you want a classic example, of what Dave just said, uh, one of my favorite movies, and I've talked about this over and over again, is Princess Bride. And I'm fairly certain that if you're connected in any way, shape, or form to fantasy, you've seen this movie. Everybody knows the line, you killed my father, prepare to die. Even though I'm fairly certain my kids have watched it multiple times, my daughter's been, swearing up and down for months now that she's never seen this movie. So last week we finally sat down and she watched it, raved about how glorious it was, and she's like, I've never seen it before and this and that. But she loves how Inigo does the whole line, thought that was just the bee's knees. And like that's something that if you have a character that's looking for a revenge quest, it's done a lot. But there's a reason it's done a lot, is because those moments are easy enough to set up. They're fulfilling enough that, it's like, okay, my character feels like I've accomplished something. So it's easy for both the player and the DM to work with. And therefore, I feel a lot of gamers pick that one up as like, an easy transition into incorporating backstory into the plot.
Well, and
So like if you're looking,
just that real quick, Ted.
yeah,
Um, that's a perfect example, right?
yeah,
Say the DM introduces an NPC, and for whatever reason you're just enamored with it, and all of a sudden you get inspired, and your character in the middle fight says, calls out, that's the guy, you're the one, you killed my brother, right? And you accuse them and you begin going berserk. And then it gives the DM the opportunity for the NPC to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen you before in my life. Or the DM to be like, with the NPC, I've killed a lot of people. The chances of me remembering your brother is like slim to none. Or, oh, that guy, oh, he died like a little bitch, or whatever, right? Like, but it just opens up some dialogue to break up the monotony of rolling dice and swinging swords. Um, and when you brought that up, and it just made me think about that, and that's a way for as a player to go, like, maybe your character really believes that's the person that killed their person. It could be true, it could not be true, it could be that they maybe did and they don't remember because they just kill a lot of people, or the DM just rolls with them and like, oh yeah, I killed your brother. If you had more family, I would have killed them too, but like, whatever. It's just like a fun little added thing. And then like, now say that NPC gets away, like now that player in particular and probably the party are just so much more motivated to go after
kill that guy.
them.
Now here's the other side of that. What if like that's your character's shtick? It's a bold lie, and maybe that's how they get into every combat. Maybe that's how they do their rage. Like, you killed my father, you son of a bitch!
Yeah.
Rah! Even though it's not true. Like,
Right, or the other end, you can have fun with it. Like the GM can have an NPC just accuse one of the players, right? And then the player can decide, did that happen? Did that not happen? Yeah, just some food for thought while you're playing. While you're in combat, ways to make combat more interesting from the player side with pure role playing and just dialogue, which talking generally is a free action, so you can just throw it in there. But what's one combat scene where your character's personal struggle changed the course of the fight? So
all
with
right, so
that,
we're gonna move on to Under the Dome, post-apocalyptic combat. Survival isn't cinematic until players make it matter. Under the Dome is a dying world trapped in a magical quarantine. The last bastions of civilization, dome city states that are filled with grind fueled violence, brutal politics, and mutated horrors, where every steel brawl could be your last, and even the winners leave with scars. You can check out the links down in the description below to the Monday articles over on nerdarchy.com written by me.
so how this topic applies. In a post-apocalyptic setting like Under the Dome, combat isn't just about hit points and initiative. It's about what are you willing to lose to stay alive. When players treats fights like tactical puzzles or power fantasy showcases, they miss the heart of the genre. There are no taverns to rest in, no shops full of potions, just grind, blood, and desperation. To make combat fun, here players need to engage with the fear of loss, the tension of scarcity, and the emotional fallout of violence.
All right, so let's dive into player driven stakes and street level choices. Let players decide what matters most in the moment. Stop the fleeing ganger with intel, pull a wounded teammate from the acid pit, or secure the crate of grind before it's stolen. Let them make desperate plays, slamming a trike into an enemy, collapsing a gangway to isolate foes, or overloading a salvaged weapon. Reward gritty, brutal decisions with consequences that reshape the battlefield.
Yeah, this comes up all the time, right? And even going back to one of our earlier streamed games of or streamed episodes of Aether Skies, early on, one of the characters got teleported off a ship into midair. Now, that character has a brother in the game, and the brother was kind of like, they'll figure it out. Where one of the other players is like, "Oh no, this is not good at all," right? And they immediately jumped into action to try and save this particular player's character, right? And honestly, I was like, he's a drill. It'll turn into a bird or something. It'll be fine. Not remembering that they weren't high enough level to turn into something that could fly. and and also it's funny because like the character, the other player that's playing the brother was kind of like, they're a drill. They'll turn into something that can fly. Which led to this tense moment. And not only that, like, because this thing that happens in combat, like afterwards, right? There's a conversation that might need to happen between these two brothers because the other brother was like, "You were just gonna let me die," and the other one actually did have the means to help them, but just chose to keep fighting instead. Like, and that just reflects this idea of having alternate choices and consequences in combat, right? And letting the players choose which ones they want to deal with. It makes for more interesting encounters, and it also makes for more dynamic role play between the party and the NPCs as well.
So the from the player's perspective here, you have to be looking around the battlefield. You have to be seeing, what can be what can I use to my advantage. It's a stupid meme that's probably been, overdone, but from Star Wars of like, it's over, I've got the high ground. Like, all right, is there a tactical position that you can gain that offers some kind of advantage? Is there something that can, split your enemies either, physically, magically, what have you? Oh, the DM is only one player at the table, and if you've got a typical 4 to 6 players, it's an average of 5 people to outthink the monsters. And I'm very fortunate enough to have played with a lot of fantastic GMs, and I've been playing for a long time, so I've seen quite a lot of odd situations and crazy things that are out there. Um, I personally prefer to put things out, play with physical terrain and scatter. And sometimes I will put stuff out on the battlefield just to see, are my players going to interact with this and do something with it? Sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no. It depends upon, who's at the table and, how much are they thinking on their toes. But by giving, your players some options, or as a player, excuse me, looking for those options, it has the ability to really, change what's out there, change the stakes of the game, if you will.
Yeah, also like this kind of makes me think of our last Under the Dome session that we had because like, you know, um I set up the battlefield. There was a ziggurat thing with some, comms around it, and everything was kind of glowing magicy. And the players are like, "Oh, I want to make sure I damage this stuff while I attack the enemies as well, because if they got magic things going on, then I want to try and disrupt it." Or they're thinking about like other things in the battle that's happening, and they're like,
It wasn't
"Oh,
so much the players, it was me.
yeah,
I was dead set on those towers meant, or those pillars
yeah."
meant something. And if this dude was protected by some kind of magic circle, I needed to take it down.
You
And
wanted to break it, right? So like giving giving choices, for the players to interact with things is a great way to do that. And sometimes I'll put things out, and I think Ted, you kind of do the same thing. And when you put it out, it doesn't really mean anything, but then the players kind of latch onto it, and all of a sudden, you have a choice to make. They've decided it means something, so you can go along with it and feed into their expectations, or you can just shut it down and nothing happens, right? And you know we ended that session, and that thing is definitely there and is going to mean something because I like to feed into whatever my players are thinking, right? I like to fuel their imagination because in turn it fuels my imagination, and we are
well, it goes back to that concept of rewarding the player's choices.
Yeah, it goes back to rewarding the player's choices, and also like letting them to continue the story, right? You know, whether it's the ongoing story or if it's just the story of this particular encounter, this particular combat, right? It's like, you know, why not let them fill in some blanks, right? Maybe you didn't intend for something to be the way they think it is, but it's a cool idea, so why let it go to waste, right? And then whether you meant it to be like that the whole time or not, it doesn't really matter. All that matters is like they're gonna be like, oh, see, I was so smart, I figured this out. I'm such a great D&D player or RPG player or whatever. It's fine. Let them have the feather for their cap and feel good about what's going on in this particular encounter because they guessed the thing that didn't exist until they guessed it, right? Now, I know there's definitely GMs out there that hate this. They hate the illusion of choice. They hate when DMs kind of change things on the fly. But I'm all for it if it adds to the narrative that's happening at the table, and the enjoyment for everyone at the table. Obviously, like I'm not a dice fudger. I tend to roll my dice in the open a lot of times, um, and things of that nature. But like for narrative stuff, yeah, absolutely. I'll be like, all right, let's do the thing, right? Or if I ask a player, if a player asks me to do something, and I tell them to make a roll. Now, I've seen DMs do this reflexively. I've done this reflexively. And like in their mind, like the roll was never going to mean anything. It's just like your GM reflex, right? It's like, oh, roll this. But at some point, I decided as a GM, I would never do that again. If I ask you to make a roll, it means something. I may not know what it means when I've asked for the roll, but guess what? I've asked for it. You've made a roll. Now I have to figure it out, right? For better or worse. We're going to add and build onto this narrative in one way or another because I said roll athletics or I said roll Arcana or whatever, and you rolled a 30 on the check, and I'm like, okay, something's got to happen now.
Those moments do change. Now, Dave talked about, changing things on the fly. uh I haven't done it in a long time. Dave is absolutely against, the concept of, oh well, I wanted my monster to last longer, so I'm going to give him more hit points. That's not overly fun. But putting something out there because a player thinks something that's there, adding a whole nother layer to what the adventure or the scene looks like can be a lot of fun. And players feel so much better when they think they've seen through your clever plan, even if it wasn't your plan, even if it's not, anything that becomes something major. Reward that thought pattern and allow them to overcome it. Having multiple objectives, having things that they can do besides, adding up piles of damage on a monster is always going to be more interesting and a more compelling story, because that's the things that players are going to talk about. Players aren't like, hey, wow, we fought something and it had a gajillion hit points. Like, that doesn't tell a grand story.
Yeah, it's not that exciting, but corruption is a currency. Let them spend it. Cast magic always comes with a cost. Invite players to choose. Trigger a mutation to survive a lethal blow. Channel unstable grind tech for one perfect strike, or embrace their flesh whip legacy to terrify their foes. Give them power, but make sure they know it leaves a mark. And this kind of like dovetails right into our last session of Under the Dome, because many sessions ago, they defeated a particular monster that when the monster dies, it drops something called Shadow Steel, like it's made of it. And they got a bunch of it. And they're like, can we make cool, powerful magic items? I'm like, yeah, but it's going to be tricky and difficult. And they did. And we turned it into a whole um, skill challenge slash combat that all happened simultaneously, and they managed to succeed, and they make some really cool items out of it. But
Like,
going
we've got a
in,
veritable treasure trove of these items. And I've debated, like, just doing a blog post talking about it. I haven't gotten there yet, but it is a crap ton of awesome stuff. But it comes with the caveat of if you die with one of these things on your person, you know, there's a chance that your soul gets sucked into one of these items. It's
Yes.
pretty bad.
Or perhaps possibly you become one of those monsters that you guys defeated to get it from, right? So this kind of came up in our last session. Uh, would you like to explain what happened, Ted?
Sure. So we are high level characters. We have pushed beyond level 20, level 22 at this point in time. And I am playing a sorcerer. My character is connected to what we are assuming is the BBEG, and we've uncovered stuff that says, "Hey, don't kill insert Ted's character because this dude has got some kind of crazy obsession with me. I don't know exactly what it is. Hopefully, we were going to find out." Well, this villain that we're fighting, super powerful, undead, a threat to the entire city, is in a mighty servant of Luco. Uh, so at one point in time, I've been battered down to like 50 some hit points. And this undead pops out of this construct armor and is like, you know what? I don't care if Vex says not to kill you. You have done far too much damage here. I just want you to die. And he casts power word kill, and down I go.
Now, Ted mentioned they're 22nd level characters. Bringing back a 22nd level character is no big deal. You know, the party's super powerful. They have powerful allies. They've
And
got the
obnoxiously
means.
rich.
Yeah, and obnoxiously rich. They've got the means. But they chose to make these magic items and hold on to them. So they finished the combat, and I was like, all right, well, next session we're going to resolve what actually happens here. You know, and there's two things going on. One, he died holding one of these items. Two, you know, they're in this cavern that has these other magical effects going on. So this is going to meld and merge to make for a very interesting situation in order for them to try and resolve whether or not they can bring Vel back to life or not. And that, you know, and that's how the next session is going to start. But you know, this just goes to show like they made a choice sessions ago to acquire more power at a cost. And like from time to time they'd bring it up. They'd be like, "Oh, got to make sure we don't die with this stuff on us," and you know, and not expecting like you know they're expecting like, "Oh, all right, like maybe we go down and get a couple of death saves. You know, we can deal with that." But they're high enough level that the threats they're dealing with, you know, are much more complicated. And you know the fact that there are certain things that can just outright kill them, um, and then normally not a problem. Again, they're high enough and powerful enough just to bring the character back. You know, in some cases maybe during combat, right? But you know because of this choice they made early on, now there's a complication. So now fun things get to happen because of it, and you know, and the story gets to go in a different and interesting direction that none of us had anticipated before. Of course, I could just say as the GM, you know what, this combat happened, your character died. You've got the shadow steel items, your soul gets sucked away. You can't bring back your character. But to me, that's hardly fun or interesting. And they're epic level characters. If they really want to set their mind to doing something, they can kind of make the impossible happen. Doesn't mean it's got to be easy. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed what they want to try and do. But, you
Or
know,
there aren't consequences for the action.
or there aren't
You know,
consequences for it. Yeah.
and ultimately, I've been playing this game long enough that you know I've had characters die. You know, it's not as drastic as it once was for me. And sure, at the moment, I'm like, all right, this sucks. And when your character dies in combat, and 22nd level combats are quite potent. It did leave like, okay, well, now I have to sit here and wait. There's nothing for me to really do at this point, but physically interact with the other players at the table. And I don't know. And I told Dave, I'm like, look, I am completely cool with it coming down to a die roll of whether or not my character, could come back to life or not. Even even with the fact of like, all right, well, if I come back, I have to level up the character, and if I don't come back, that means I have to make a 23rd level character, for this game. Uh, so doing both as homework for the next session is like, okay, this is a daunting amount of work, but I'm here for it, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, where things go and how things go to see, what transpires. And at this point in time, there's good and bad, no matter what the outcome is. Because sure, I want to keep playing the character that I've been playing for the last 3.5 years, but at the same time, I also like the idea of where this other character, story could go, being inserted into such a late stage game. Who was he before? How has no one known that somebody has collected this much power and stayed out of the political struggles? Uh, so there's a lot of fun little story beats that are bubbling and waiting to happen, and it all comes down to how things unfold next session.
And honestly, that was just a whole lot of words to say, hey, as the GM, offer your players power boosts in the middle of combats, right? That may have consequences. And players, do it. Do the fun thing, right? Like break stuff. Have fun with it, right? It's a game. Sometimes it's gonna work out, sometimes it's not gonna work out. Roll with it and like see where the story goes from there.
So how about turning trauma into tactics? A gladiator reveals the scars that mark their time in the pits. A former test subject speaks the name of their maker mid battle to destabilize an enemy. Encourage players to weaponize their stories, burn a memory, call in a favor, or sacrifice something personal to gain the upper hand. Make emotional risks just as valuable as mechanical ones.
And I feel like in our Under the Dome game, this has come up time and time again, right? At
Mhm.
at different intervals and different levels. Um, whether it was to fuel a combat, whether it was to enhance a combat, or whether it was to completely negate a combat, right? There was a pivotal point in this campaign, and you've probably heard us talk about it, where I introduced Ted's old mentor, master,
Nemesis.
captor, tormentor, and I thought, it might just be a tough fight, one and done. I'm just gonna pay homage to his backstory, get this out of the way. But Ted did something that he rarely does with his characters. He usually plays his characters as kind of cocky, but he did a complete 180, and he's like, "No, I'm absolutely terrified of this guy, and I do not want to fight him." So it went from being like, "Oh, this will probably be a fight, but might be tough for the players," to, "Oh, this is going to be a role playing encounter, right?" Which is also kind of cool. Let your players turn your fights into role playing encounter. Sometimes it's okay. Um, but it's really fueled more of the campaign. It really has made um this particular character, this NPC, the central big bad, or one of the central big bads, where we're kind of hurtling toward the culmination of possibly a final encounter with this particular person. But there's been several times that there's been combats, and um they've been enacted by this particular NPC where he doesn't directly take part, but it's always to kind of taunt Ted's character and the group, right? He's always like messing with them, you know, and as Ted said, like he's kind as they've learned, he's kind of obsessed with Vel and Vel's companions, and just tormenting Vel and making it last, right? So it's made a lot of combat encounters more personal, and also we've had quite a few of these where like different ones have just revealed more pieces of Ted's backstory to the rest of the players, even to himself at some points, because his body has been mucked with a lot, but so has his mind. So like it's given him the opportunity to have fun with it and go, I go, well, it could be what you thought it was, or it could be different. What do you want to do?
and it's kind of crazy, that this story unfolded the way it did because of the choice that I made. But I had to, and usually it's bad when somebody's like, I did what my character would do, and I took this moment of like, no, I think there's a fear now. Now at 20th level, I don't think he quite had the same fear that he did at eighth level or whatever it was when we actually encountered the guy. Um, but it was a situation that I felt it was far more interesting of a story for me to just get into the conversation and really play it as yeah. you know I'm dancing on eggshells. I'm you know fearing to wet my pants because this is someone who spent a long time mucking with me physically, mentally. My character is a simic hybrid and a elemental mutation sorcerer, which is a subclass over on nerdarchy.com. And therefore he has been created. What he was and what he is aren't anywhere close to the same thing anymore. So visually, there's nothing that looks like him. Um, so I was like, well, this will be fun to kind of play this guy, and then as we kind of get into this enemy spellcaster, it's taken the story to a phenomenal direction, and I'm happy for that choice, and I'm happy that Dave has gone along with it. Now I'm curious to see where are things going to go, whichever direction Vel's life goes. I can only imagine like how pissed off this guy is going to be if Vel doesn't come back to life and the dude who killed him is already dead, so that he wouldn't even be able to get revenge.
So interesting enough too, like Vel isn't the only one that has these kind of things like happening during the campaign and coming up during encounters. Our goblin Dick, that's his name. Don't look at me. I think he randomly generated, named after the deer, not the appendage. But he's had things happen with hag encounters numerous times now that because of his decision and each one kind of builds on the last. So like as he's building kind of his history with these hags, these these consequences keep coming up because he kind of like keeps putting himself in these situations where these could be combat encounters, but oftentimes they get maneuvered away from them, and they don't. It's because they don't have to be. Uh, one of the things was like he had a psychic being implanted in his brain that eventually exploded out, and he considers his son that is kind of being raised by these hags, and he'll go to visit, and at least on one of the occasions, uh, this psychic entity almost killed half the party inadvertently, and also it is always drawn towards the goblin, and has been very very dangerous. But again, the character like perceives this entity as their child, so he doesn't respond negatively to the hostile circumstances that come off of this entity because he doesn't perceive it as being intentional. Whether it is or not, it still remains to be seen. But it's created interesting tensions where like this could easily just be a combat, but instead it's always like the player is trying to figure out how to um, mitigate the circumstances and the situation so that it isn't a combat, right? Because this character has an emotional connection to this dangerous entity and the hags as well at this point. So giving the players like these choices and letting them have fun with them. And that being said too, like because the player has been a good sport with it, there's also been power ups to go along the way. As as the psychic entity was growing within them, they actually started gaining psychic abilities themselves, and and have become a little bit more powerful and gifted with things, because they kind of let this kind of situation kind of expand and build as we play, and it's still ongoing, and before the campaign ends, who knows how this could play out, right? Will there be the final confrontation between father and son? Will they get on the same page? Will they connect? Who knows? So, when you have made a brutal or desperate combat decision that changed who your character was.
All right, so let's look into some Zoo Mafia. Make it personal, make it pulpy. Crime, claws, and cinematic TTRPG combat in Zoo Mafia. Zoo Mafia is a gritty Prohibition era crime drama starring real zoo animals as mobsters. Beneath the watchful eyes of humans, these beasts live double lives of vice, violence, and vendettas, all while trying to stay out of the papers and off the humans' radar. Links to the upcoming Kickstarter and free quick start rules are included in the description down below.
All right. How this combat or pardon me, how this topic applies. Combat in Zoo Mafia isn't about power fantasy. It's about pulp drama. Every punch, gunshot, a Molotov is a storytelling moment. Whether it's an enraged gorilla with a tire iron or a raccoon bruiser going down swinging to protect the stash, the most memorable fights are the ones that reveal character truths, escalate consequences, and deepen the noir narrative. Fun combat happens when players use their animal identities, mob ties, and secrets like weapons, and when fights reflect the emotional weight of living on the edge of exposure.
All right, so use your animal, use the setting. Encourage players to fight like their animal. Flying ambushes from parrots, surprise tail whips from lemurs, or a hippo going feral in a moonshine soaked melee. Let the zoo itself become a chaotic battlefield. Swing from the vines in the primate house, toss grenades into flamingo ponds, or get chased in the penguin exhibit. Zoo Mafia combat is at best when it feels like a cross between the Untouchables and Looney Tunes After Dark.
Yeah, right. Like, so Zoo Mafia is a very, when it comes to your animal choices, there are no hard and fast mechanics, right? It's just, there's an agreement between Zookeeper, the GM, and the players. If the animal can do the thing, then you can do the thing, right? If you are a animal that's very well equipped to attack without weapons, well, you don't really need weapons to do damage. You're a bear, you have claws and fangs. You're a great cat, you have those as well, right? You're a poisonous snake, you have a poisonous bite. It just does the damage it does. Or, if you're a creature that's amphibious, you can incorporate that into what you do. If you're a flying squirrel, well, you can glide. If you're a bird, you can fly, right? So why not use this stuff? In the game that Ted most recently ran, where we played not just regular animals, but anthropomorphic animals, one of the characters was playing an armadillo, and an armadillo goon, and so he would be like, oh, armadillos roll into balls. So there's many times where he's like, oh, I want to roll into a ball and roll into the combat like a wrecking ball, right? And why not? And it's just a fun way to add to the narrative, and for you as a player to make cool things happen, right? you know can I roll into the center of all those monkey mooks in a ball and try and knock them over like I'm bowling? Sure, let's see what happens. That's just so much more fun, and then you pop up in the middle of them, swinging with your brass knuckles afterwards. That's, to me, that's a good time in Zoo Mafia, and I highly encourage players to, use the setting, use their surroundings, as well as, use their animal abilities. Does it necessarily give them a mechanical advantage or bonus? No, but it does create opportunities for fun and hilarity to happen at the table.
When you step into who your character is, it it does what you would expect. It's going to make you more immersed in the game, in the setting, in the story, and that's ultimately what we're all looking for. Like, you want to be a part of what's what's going on. When you watch a movie, you want to enjoy the story. And when I go to the movies, to me, a perfect movie is it holds my full attention from start to finish. If I look at my watch or if I want to pull out my phone or whatever, even if it's for just a moment, it's like, all right, I'm not fully immersed. The cinematics, the script, the acting, whatever. At some point in time, most movies don't 100% hold me. There's a handful out there that even rewatching, I'm like, you got me. I love this. Um, and a game, an RPG can be just the same. And it's up to you and your table what rules you have for pulling out your phones or having side conversations that are not about the game. Only your table gets to figure out what rules and stuff that's going to be. But if you're looking to be more into it, if you want to make that choice as a player, it's getting more into your character and doing the choices that fit for you. So looking for that setting, looking for who your animal is, or in a case like D&D, what your species is, what your background is. Attach yourself to what is going on through the tools that are already at hand. Link to what is on that character sheet that's not stated mechanically, but stated thematically.
Not only that too, and like thinking about the environment and the setting, like in our Ravenloft game this weekend, right? Like this doesn't just apply to Zoo Mafia, like you just said. You can use it in D&D, other games, and it just so happened, like I was trying to go down a set of down a stairway, and there was a door. I tried to open it. It was a mimic. I escaped the mimic, and run away from it. Um, and and the GM's like, well, it's just going to take a defensive position. He's like, quote unquote, dodging, right? So I was like, all right, on my turn, I'm going just to pull out a flask of oil, throw it at not the mimic, but the door jam above where the mimic's mimicking, right? And then as my interact with an object earlier in the scene in the encounter, I had lit a torch and dropped it in the room, and it was just burning on the floor. So I'm like, I want to just kick it down the stairs into the puddle of oil. Well, the GM's like, I'm not going to make you roll for anything. You're just hitting the wall with the oil. The oil is just going to run down over top of the door, mimic, and create a puddle. You're kicking the torch down the steps. It has nowhere else to go but to land in the puddle of oil. So boom, the mimic is now on fire. Right? No dice rolls actually necessary. Just used up all my actions, and it was just like, I don't know, how much does oil do? Roll damage for the mimic. Um, as a GM, why not let your players do the cool thing? And as a player, right, just because it's not necessarily a thing on your character sheet as an action, doesn't mean you can't try and do it anyway, right? To one, to be creative, to have fun, and just to make the combats more interesting and do more than I just drop another set of dice.
Yeah, and making those choices, is, might give you some mechanical advantage, or it might just create new moments of story, or take the story in a direction that no one had really anticipated until you brought that up, or until you proposed, that as an idea. That fight that Dave was talking about, it was a hard fight. We had no idea how things were going to go. Um, and Dave was kind of working a combat from one side, and at the same time, like, it stopped the main bad guys from moving, but was creating considerable more threats from his side. So it could have gone quite badly for all of us if that decision really hadn't been made.
Laws, scars, and secrets. Let them bleed. Make sure each combat reveals something. A button loses it when they see the same flat paw that took out their brother. A grifter fumbles the con mid-fight, blowing their alias. The mob can't risk the human seeing, but the fight spills into the visitor plaza. Every round should test the player's flaws as much as their stats.
I wound up doing a post recently on flaws in Zoo Mafia, And it's something that, like, there's a reason why you're a criminal. So bringing those in and revealing them, making it be a choice. Um, you know, when you look at, oh, this dude killed my brother, those can be moments that are like, all right, what does this mean for my character? Or the grifter slipping from one alias to another. Oh, I used the wrong voice, and now I've just given myself away. Like, that could be because you botched a roll, or it could be because the player's not paying proper attention, or maybe they're looking to, have a little bit of fun and up the drama, up the narrative, and see where things go. Like, you can have a lot of fun by making the bad choice.
Or hear me out. You roll a success with consequences in a bank,
Mm.
and your grandmother happens to be in the bank where things are going down because they're giving away a free toaster oven that she really wants. And your
Uh,
character's kind of thing is setting things on fire.
yeah.
And someone decided that, setting off a bunch of like paint bombs as a distraction would be a great way to do things. And the character that sets things on fires wasn't really thinking about how flammable paint was at that time, and may not accidentally set their own grandmother on fire during this scene, right? So, you know doing risky actions, taking dealing with the consequences, and adding to the tension in the scene are all things you can do as a player, right? And as the GM, right? So in that particular situation, both the player and the GM kind of in unison just ratcheted things up one notch after another until things got really ugly.
And
And it made the conflict that was going on much more difficult, and you know the choices harder and more consequences, and it also like changed the narrative afterwards.
absolutely. And those kind of moments, are the crux of, whether you call it Powered by the Apocalypse or the D666 system. It's a scenario of, anytime you've got a game where there are success with consequences, it's a narrative dice system. So anything really could be that consequence. And when you've got a player like Dave who doesn't have a problem putting trauma onto their character because it's good for the story, that's utterly fabulous.
Just because like maybe you're playing a system that doesn't have that in it, doesn't mean as a GM you couldn't add it, right? You couldn't go, well, technically that's a fail, but you're right on the cusp. What are you willing to accept to turn that failure into a success, right? What consequences will you take? And you can do that in D&D. Like, DM Fiat is a thing. And if you're doing and also when you give the player the choice, right? It's not you, the DM, doing it to them. It's them agreeing to it, right? Because they could say, "Nah, I'll just take the failure." But if they're like, "Oh, I'm going to succeed," but what happens? And you're like, "Oh, well, here's what's going to happen." You know, I love that kind of stuff. Maybe some of you don't, but if you haven't played with it, it might be something to experiment in your games. There's no, like I said, there's no reason why they needed a 14 to succeed, but they got a 13, where you could be like, well, I can give you a partial success at a price, and then let them decide if they're willing to pay the price or not.
That is a fabulous idea to kind of look into. Cinematic escalation and narrative stakes. Start small, fists and barbed bats, end with flaming Molotovs in a zookeeper's golf cart. Let players choose objectives during the fight. Save the peanut rum stash, take out the enforcer, distract the humans with a natural stampede. Push them to make moves that change the scene, not just rack up damage. Reward rule of Reward rule of cool risks with juicy consequences and hard choices.
Right? Like this has been a theme we've been talking about all along. just because it's a lot more fun and it's a lot more interesting than going, oh, you just fail. And I love it when the players are like, hey, what if I do this or what if I do that, and they offer up these potential other things, these other complications. As a GM, as a zookeeper, more than likely I'm going to say, sure, we can absolutely try and do that. Here's what it's going to take to do it, right? Here's an extra thing that we're going to have to do, and if they succeed at the extra thing, they're going to get extra rewards for doing it. But if they fail, well, there's going to be some extra consequences. And I think that just makes for a more fun, engaging encounter than just like, okay, the dice say yay, the dice say no, nay. Now, by the nature of the D666 system or Powered by the Apocalypse systems, you do have that reward consequence, the success with consequences built into it, so you automatically get a bit of it, and that's also generally the most common result that happens. So it's a lot more fun. Also, in D666 system, it also makes combats very fast and potentially very brutal compared to other systems where things can drag out a bit. But the idea of having, we talked about this over and over again, having alternative objectives other than just defeating the enemy is great. The other thing is great, let the players suggest them, right? Let them come up with them. And if they do and it makes sense to you, why not go along with it? Reward them for their creativity. And if it goes south, punish them for that too. Or I should say, reward them for that too.
Yeah, so just looking at, how you can add these kind of elements to, ultimately you're looking to increase immersion, you're looking to reward the player choice, and get everyone involved in the story. That they not only are loving what's going on, but they care about what happens next.
Absolutely. What's one time your character's secret flaw or personal code? Oh. What's one time your character's secret flaw or personal code turned a simple fight into something unforgettable? All right, folks, this is where we turn to our Q&A. I haven't really seen any questions in the chat. It's been a little light tonight. But so, I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us and joining us and listening. Hopefully you got something out of that.
So that's a wrap on tonight's dive into what really makes D&D combat come alive. Whether you're behind the screen or rolling with a party, fun fights are about more than tougher monsters.
From sky-high boarding actions in Aether Skies to desperate scrambles in Under the Dome to raccoon run bar brawls in Zoo Mafia, we saw that stakes, collaboration, and creativity turn a slog into a story worth telling.
Huge thanks to everyone who's joined us live, sharing your own epic encounters, near TPKs, and the moments when players made combat unforgettable. You make this community stronger.
If you got value out of our chat, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. We've got more table talk goodness coming your way.
And remember, that secret isn't just the stat block. It's in how you play together. Keep your fights dynamic, keep your players engaged, and as always, until next time,
Stay nerdy.
stay nerdy.